This is a story about Adela Cruz, a woman who built her life on control and calculation, only to discover that some forces can't be measured. On the brutal Texas frontier where survival demanded steel and strategy demanded silence, she met someone who changed everything, and she ran, again and again. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit like and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels across the world. The sun hadn't cleared the horizon yet, but Adela Cruz was already awake. She stood in the doorway of the trading post barn, coffee cooling in her tin cup, watching the darkness bleed into gray. The air smelled like dust and horse sweat, and the particular kind of quiet that comes before the world wakes up demanding things from you. She liked this hour. It was the only time of day that didn't ask questions. Her father, Miguel Cruz, had built this place from nothing, a horse trading operation that stretched across 3 counties and had a reputation that carried even further. People came from as far as San Antonio looking for Cruz horses. Good bloodlines, fair prices, no nonsense. That last part was mostly Adela's doing. Miguel had the eye for horseflesh and the charm for closing deals. Adela kept the books, managed the hands, and made sure nobody walked away thinking they'd gotten one over on the Cruz family. She was good at it, better than good. She could spot a liar at 20 paces and calculate profit margins in her head faster than most men could write them down. She'd had to be good. Being a woman in this business meant proving yourself twice as hard for half the recognition, so she'd learned to be sharp, disciplined, untouchable. The thing about being untouchable, though, is that eventually you start to believe it yourself. "You're up early." Adela didn't turn around. She knew her father's footsteps, the particular scrape of his boots on the packed earth. "Same time as always," she said. Miguel came to stand beside her, his own coffee sending steam into the cool air. He was quiet for a moment, and Adela knew he was reading the horizon the same way she was, checking the weather, gauging the day ahead, doing the silent arithmetic of survival that people who worked the land did without thinking. "Expecting anyone today?" he asked. "3 buyers from Fredericksburg. They're looking at the gray mare and maybe the roan gelding, and that rancher from out west is supposed to send someone about feed prices." "The Lawson Ranch?" "No, farther west, past the settlements. One of those independent operations." Miguel made a sound that might have been approval or caution. With him, it was hard to tell. "Those frontier folks are different. Don't always do business the way we're used to. Money spends the same regardless." "Does it?" Miguel looked at her, something in his expression she couldn't quite read. "Be careful out there, mija. Not everyone values the same things we do." It was an odd thing to say, and Adela almost asked him what he meant. But the sound of horses approaching from the east pulled their attention, and the question dissolved into the morning routine. The buyers from Fredericksburg turned out to be exactly what she'd expected. Middle-aged men with sunburned necks and calculating eyes. The type who'd try to find fault with a perfect horse just to knock $50 off the price. Adela dealt with them the way she always did. Calm, factual, utterly immovable. By noon, they'd bought both horses at her price and left looking vaguely confused about how it had happened. She was in the barn tallying the sale in the ledger when she heard the second set of hoofbeats. Different rhythm, single rider, moving with purpose but not urgency. Adela set down her pencil and walked to the barn entrance, one hand instinctively checking that her hair was still pinned up properly. Appearances mattered in this business. Looking disheveled meant looking desperate, and desperate people didn't command respect. The rider crested the low rise to the east, and Adela felt something shift in her chest, a small, strange sensation like a door opening somewhere she didn't know existed. He wasn't what she'd expected. The frontier ranchers who usually made the trip this far east tended toward a certain type. Rough, weathered, men who looked like the land had carved them from granite and hadn't bothered to polish the edges. This man was different. He sat his horse with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from actual skill, not performance. His clothes were practical, dark pants, a plain shirt, boots that had seen real use, but everything fit properly, was clean despite the dust of travel. He wore his hair longer than was fashionable in town, pulled back in a way that suggested function over style. But it was his face that caught her. Strong features, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that seemed to take in everything without appearing to look directly at anything. There was something about the set of his jaw, the way he held himself, that suggested someone who'd learned to read situations before walking into them. He dismounted before he reached the barn, leading his horse the last 20 yards on foot, respectful, aware of his surroundings. "Miss Cruz?" His voice matched his appearance, measured, quiet, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Not Spanish, not the drawl of the Texas settlements, something else underneath. "That's right. You're from the Western Ranch?" "Kyle." He didn't offer a last name. "I'm here about feed prices and possibly some breeding stock, if you have time." The way he said it wasn't deferential exactly. It was more like he was genuinely asking if this was a good time, rather than assuming his business would automatically take priority. It threw her off balance, just slightly. "I have time," she said. "Let me see your list." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Their fingers didn't touch. He was careful about that, but Adela felt hyper-aware of the exchange anyway. She unfolded the paper, grateful for something concrete to focus on. The list was detailed. Specific quantities, grade requirements, delivery schedules. Someone had put real thought into this. "This is a substantial order," she said, scanning the numbers. "You're planning to expand your operation?" "Stabilize it. We've been making do with what we can source locally, but the quality is inconsistent. We need reliable supply lines." Adela looked up from the paper, studying him with the same careful attention she gave to horses. "Most of the frontier operations I deal with are focused on survival, not stability. You're thinking longer term." Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. "Survival is short-term thinking. Stability is how you build something that lasts." "That's a practical philosophy. Is there any other kind worth having?" The question hung between them, and Adela realized with a small jolt that she was enjoying this conversation. Actually enjoying it, not just tolerating it as part of business. When was the last time that had happened? She forced herself back to the list. "These prices are reasonable. I can meet most of these specifications. The delivery schedule is aggressive but manageable. However," she tapped one line, "this grade of oats, we'd need to special order. It'll add cost and time." "How much of each?" She did the math in her head, factoring in transport and margin. Gave him the number. Cale nodded once. "Fair. What about breeding stock? We're looking to improve our horses. Something with endurance and temperament for rough country." "Let me show you what we have." They walked through the operation, Adela pointing out various horses, explaining bloodlines and characteristics. Cale listened with an intensity that felt different from the usual buyer attention. He was actually learning, not just waiting for his turn to negotiate. They stopped at a corral where a young stallion was testing the fence line, all nervous energy and unproven potential. "That one's not for sale," Adela said. "I wasn't going to ask about him. Wrong temperament for what we need. Too reactive." Adela turned to look at Kyle fully. "Most people see a strong young horse and assume strength equals value. Most people haven't spent enough time in country where the wrong horse gets you killed." He said it matter-of-factly, without drama. "We need horses that think before they react. That stallion is all reaction." He was right, completely right. And the fact that he'd assessed it so quickly and accurately did something strange to her professional composure. "The bay mare in the next corral," she said. 3 years old, good bloodlines, smart, doesn't spook easy. She'd be a solid foundation." They spent another hour going through options, discussing details, and by the time they circled back to the trading post office, Adela had a begrudging respect for this quiet stranger from the frontier. He knew horses, really knew them, not in the showy way of men trying to impress, but in the quiet, certain way of someone who'd learned through consequence. She was tallying up the proposed order when Kyle spoke again. "You made an error in the feed calculation." Adela's hand froze on the ledger. "Excuse me?" "The oats. Your multiplier for the special order. You used the standard rate, but you said it would be special order. That would change the transport calculation." She looked down at her numbers. He was right. She'd made a mistake. A small one, but a mistake nonetheless. It would have cost her money, not much, but the principle stung worse than the amount. Heat crept up her neck. She never made calculation errors. Never. "You're right," she said, the words coming out more clipped than she intended. She scratched out the number, recalculated, wrote the new total. Updated price. The silence that followed felt weighted. Adela kept her eyes on the ledger, waiting for what usually came next, the smug satisfaction, the little power play, the reminder that she'd been caught in a mistake. It didn't come. It's an easy thing to miss, Kyle said quietly. The calculation shift isn't obvious unless you've dealt with those transport logistics before. Adela looked up sharply. He wasn't patronizing her. He was just stating a fact. His expression was neutral, maybe even sympathetic. I don't make mistakes, she said, hating how defensive it sounded. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do when you catch them. You caught it, not me. Does that matter? It's corrected now. And there it was, the thing that would bother her for days afterward. He'd pointed out her error without making it into a weapon. He'd given her the truth without the judgment. In a world where every interaction was a negotiation for power, where showing weakness meant losing ground, he'd just been honest. It was disarming, infuriating, and somehow, despite herself, Adela felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. The updated price works for us, Kyle said, breaking the moment. I'll need to arrange payment and transport. Can we schedule delivery for 3 weeks out? Yes, I'll need half payment up front. Standard terms. I'll have it sent over within the week. They finalized the details with brisk efficiency, and then Kyle was preparing to leave. He swung up into his saddle with easy grace, gathered the reins, then paused. Thank you for your time, Miss Cruz. This will help our operation considerably. It's business, Adela said. Mutually beneficial. Is that all it is? The question was casual, almost throwaway, but something in his tone made it feel like he was asking about more than feed orders and horse trading. Before Adela could figure out how to respond, or even if she should respond, Cale touched the brim of his hat and turned his horse toward the western trail. She watched him ride away until he disappeared over the rise, her coffee long cold in her hand and her mind turning over the conversation like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit the expected pattern. That seemed to go well. Adela jumped slightly. She hadn't heard her father approach. It's a good sale, she said, forcing her attention back to practical matters. Substantial order, reliable payment terms. I meant the conversation looked involved. He knows horses, made it easier to find the right match for his needs. Miguel was quiet for a moment. He caught your calculation error. Of course, her father had been watching. Miguel missed very little. It was a minor mistake, easily corrected. And he pointed it out without making an issue of it. Miguel's tone was carefully neutral. Interesting approach. Adela felt her defenses rising. What are you getting at? Nothing, mija, just noticing. He started to walk away, then paused. You know, sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who try to take advantage of you. Sometimes they're the ones who treat you with respect you didn't know you were hungry for. He was gone before Adela could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the barn doorway with a cold cup of coffee and a strange, unsettled feeling in her chest. She told herself it was just the irritation of having made a mistake, just the slight embarrassment of being corrected, even gently, just another business transaction on a Thursday morning that would fade into the blur of all the other transactions. She threw herself into work for the rest of the day, inventory, correspondence, breaking a young horse that needed consistent handling. By evening, she was physically tired enough that she should have slept well. Instead, she lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation, the way Kyle had assessed the horses, the quiet certainty in his voice, the moment when he'd corrected her error without making her feel small. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is what you do when you catch them. She'd been dealing with men in business for years. She knew all their moves, all their strategies. She could spot a manipulation, a power play, a calculated charm offensive from a mile away. This hadn't been any of those things. Cale had just been honest, direct, respectful. It shouldn't have been remarkable. It definitely shouldn't have kept her awake. Adela rolled over, punched her pillow into shape, and firmly told herself to stop being ridiculous. It was one conversation, one business deal. He'd come, they'd conducted business, he'd left. That was all. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, her last thought was wondering when the payment would arrive. and whether Kyle would bring it himself or send someone else. The payment came 6 days later. Not from Kyle, but from a ranch hand who delivered the money, picked up half the feed order, and left with barely 20 words exchanged. Adela told herself she wasn't disappointed. She threw herself into work with renewed focus. There were other customers, other deals, other horses to train and sell. The cruise operation didn't run itself. She had responsibilities, standards to maintain, a reputation to uphold. 2 weeks passed. The second half of Kyle's feed order was ready for pickup, and Adela found herself checking the eastern road more often than necessary. She told herself it was simple logistics. She needed to know when to have the hands ready to load the wagons. When the rider finally appeared on the horizon, something in Adela's chest tightened with recognition even before she could clearly see who it was. Kyle. She forced herself to finish the entry she was writing in the ledger before walking out to meet him. Calm, professional, this was just business. He dismounted the same way he had before, early, respectful, leading his horse the last distance on foot. "Miss Cruz, I hope the timing works for pickup." "It's fine. The order is ready." She kept her voice level, businesslike. "I'll have the hands start loading." "I appreciate it." He paused. The first delivery was exactly as specified. Quality was excellent. "I don't deal in substandard goods. I've noticed." Something in the way he said it made Adela look at him more directly. His expression was neutral, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and she just hadn't let herself see it. "I've been thinking," Kale continued, "about what you said regarding breeding stock. The bay mare you recommended has been everything you said. I'd like to discuss possibly establishing a longer-term arrangement, regular purchases, priority access to new stock that fits our needs." It was a good business proposition, the kind of steady, reliable relationship that every trader wanted. Adela should have jumped at it. Instead, she heard herself say, "That's a significant commitment. You'd be tying yourself to a single supplier." "Only if that supplier continues to meet standards." Kale's gaze was steady. "I think you will." "You don't know that. You've only dealt with us twice." "I know quality when I see it, and I know integrity when I encounter it." He said it simply, like he was stating an obvious fact. "Those are rare enough to be worth a commitment." Adela felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. This wasn't just business talk. Or rather, it was business talk that carried something else underneath, a recognition, an acknowledgement of something neither of them was directly naming. "I'll need to think about it," she said, retreating to safer ground. "That kind of arrangement would require different terms, different pricing structures." "Of course. I'm not asking for an answer today. Just consider it." The loading took about an hour. Adela supervised, ostensibly to ensure everything was done correctly, but really because walking away would have felt like running, and she refused to run from anything. Kale helped with the loading despite his role as customer. He worked alongside her ranch hands with easy competence, and Adela noticed the way the men responded to him, with respect, not deference. By the time the wagons were ready, Kyle was discussing horse training techniques with her head wrangler like they'd known each other for years. "You didn't have to help," Adela said when Kyle came to settle the final paperwork. "I know, but standing around watching other people work has never made sense to me. Most buyers wouldn't. I'm not most buyers." No, he definitely wasn't. They finalized the transaction, and then Kyle was preparing to leave again. But this time, he hesitated before mounting. "There's a ridge about 5 miles west of here," he said. "Good view of the valley. I sometimes stop there on the way back, let my horse rest, clear my head. If you're ever out that way—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the invitation was clear. Adela's heart was beating faster than it should. "I don't usually ride out that far." "No, I imagine you don't." He swung up into the saddle. "But if you ever wanted to—" He didn't finish that sentence either. He just touched his hat and turned his horse west. Adela stood watching until he disappeared, and this time she couldn't pretend it was just about making sure the customer left satisfied. "Mija." Her father's voice was gentle, but Adela still felt herself tense. "I'm not blind," Miguel said quietly, "and I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown woman, but I will say this. Be careful. It's just business. Is it? Adela turned to face him. What do you want me to say? I want you to be honest with yourself. Miguel's expression was kind but serious. That man looks at you like you're water in a drought, and you look at him like you're trying to solve a problem you didn't know existed. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just good business chemistry, but if it's more than that, he trailed off. If it's more than that, what? Then you need to decide what you're willing to risk, because men like that, men from out there, from the frontier, they live in a different world, and crossing between worlds always costs something. It was the same warning he'd given her before Kael's first visit, but now it carried more weight, because now Adela understood what he was really saying. She'd built her life on being practical, on making smart decisions based on calculation and evidence. Emotions were variables to be managed, not forces to surrender to. She'd seen what happened to women who let feelings override sense. They ended up dependent, vulnerable, trapped. So she did what she always did when faced with something she couldn't calculate. She walked away. She didn't ride out to that ridge. She didn't think about Kael's invitation. She buried herself in work, took on extra clients, spent long hours in the barn and the office until she was too tired to think about anything except sleep. 3 weeks passed. A month. 6 weeks. The longing didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. But Adela was disciplined. She'd trained herself to ignore discomfort, to push through difficulty. She could push through this too. Then one afternoon while she was working with a particularly stubborn young horse, one of the ranch hands called out, "Rider coming from the west!" Adela's heart lurched. She told herself it could be anyone. The west was a big place. Plenty of ranchers out there. But when she looked up and saw the familiar figure on the horizon, she knew her discipline had just been tested in a way it had never been tested before. Kael had come back. She finished with the horse, carefully, properly, not rushing even though every nerve in her body was screaming at her to stop, to go, to meet him. When she finally walked to the trading post, Kael was already there, talking to her father about something she couldn't hear. Miguel saw her first. He said something to Kael, touched his shoulder in a gesture that looked almost paternal, and then walked away, leaving them alone. Miss Cruz. Mr. Kael. The formality felt absurd after 6 weeks of thinking about him, but Adela clung to it anyway. I wanted to discuss that longer-term arrangement, Kael said. If you've had time to consider it. I have. Adela kept her voice steady. I don't think it's a good idea. Something flickered in Kael's expression. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment, but it was gone too quickly to read. May I ask why? It's too much commitment for what amounts to speculation. We don't know each other well enough to establish that kind of business relationship. We could get to know each other better. The words hung between them, and Adela knew they weren't talking about business anymore. Maybe they'd never really been talking about business. I don't think that's wise, she said. Why not? Because... She stopped, frustrated. Because why? Because it scared her? Because she didn't know how to categorize it? Because every instinct she'd developed for reading situations and managing risks was screaming conflicting warnings? Because we're from different worlds, she finally said. You said it yourself, frontier life is different, and I have responsibilities here. A business to help run, standards to maintain. I'm not asking you to abandon any of that. Then what are you asking? Kael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I'm asking if you ever rode out to that ridge. Adela's throat tightened. No. Why not? Because I knew if I did, it wouldn't just be about the view. The admission hung between them, honest and raw in a way Adela hadn't intended. Kael's expression shifted, not triumph, not satisfaction, but something deeper, understanding maybe, recognition. Would that be so terrible? He asked quietly. Yes. The word came out harder than she meant. Yes, because I don't do this. I don't make decisions based on feelings. I calculate, I plan, I maintain control. And you? She gestured at him, frustrated. You make me want to do something reckless, and I can't afford reckless. Who says it would be reckless? Everything about it is reckless. We barely know each other. You live days away. Our worlds are completely different. It doesn't make sense. Not everything that matters makes sense. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people hurt. Cale stepped closer, not threatening, just closing the distance enough that she had to look directly at him. "You're right," he said. "We barely know each other. But I know you're the smartest person I've talked to in years. I know you see patterns in horses and numbers and people that most folks miss completely. I know you correct your mistakes without excuses and you give honest value for honest work. I know when you're thinking hard about something, you get this tiny line right here," he gestured to his own forehead, "and when you're trying not to smile, you press your lips together just slightly." He paused. "And I know I've been finding reasons to ride this direction for 6 weeks because I can't stop thinking about a woman who's too smart to waste time on someone who isn't worth it." Adela's breath caught. Nobody had ever seen her that clearly. Nobody had ever bothered to look that closely. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably. It won't work." "Maybe not." "Then why are you here?" Cale's smile was small, almost sad. "Because some things are worth trying even when the odds are bad. Because the alternative, walking away and never knowing, that's worse than failing." And there it was. The thing Adela had been avoiding for 6 weeks. The truth she'd buried under work and discipline and calculated distance. She was terrified, not of Kyle, but of what wanting him meant, of losing the control she'd built her entire identity around, of making a choice based on something as unreliable as emotion. "I need time," she heard herself say. "How much time?" "I don't know." Cale nodded slowly. "All right, I'll give you time." But Adela, it was the first time he'd used her first name, and it hit her with unexpected force. "Don't take forever. Life out here is too short and too hard to waste it being afraid of the things that might actually make it worth living." He turned and walked to his horse, mounted, looked back at her one more time. "That ridge is still there," he said. 5 miles west. I'll check it every time I'm in the area, just in case." Then he was gone, and Adela was standing alone in the dusty yard, her heart pounding and her carefully constructed walls feeling suddenly very flimsy. That night, she lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. But this time, instead of trying to push the thoughts away, she let them come. She thought about the way Kyle had corrected her mistake without making her feel small, the way he'd helped load wagons without being asked, the way he'd looked at her like she was someone worth crossing counties to see. She thought about her father's warning, about different worlds and costs and risks. She thought about discipline and control and all the walls she'd built to protect herself from exactly this kind of complication. And then, for just a moment, she let herself think about what it might feel like to ride out to that ridge, to stop calculating the risks and just try. The wanting was sharp enough to hurt. Adela rolled over, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and made herself a promise. Tomorrow, she would work. She would maintain her standards and run the business and do all the things she was supposed to do. But maybe, just maybe, she would also think about what she actually wanted, instead of just what made sense. It was a small crack in her armor, but it was a crack nonetheless. And somewhere out on the frontier, 5 miles west of everything she knew, a ridge waited under an indifferent sky. The crack didn't heal. If anything, it widened. Adela tried to ignore it. She worked harder, longer. She took on clients she normally would have turned away, spent hours breaking horses that didn't need that much attention, reorganized inventory that was already organized. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. It didn't work. 3 weeks after Kyle's last visit, she was in the barn office going over accounts when her father appeared in the doorway. "You're working yourself into the ground," Miguel said. "I'm just staying on top of things." "You've reorganized the tack room twice this week. The horses are getting more attention than they know what to do with. And you've been staring at that same page of numbers for 10 minutes without writing anything down." Adela set her pencil down carefully. "What's your point?" Miguel came into the office, pulled up the old wooden chair that creaked under his weight, and sat down with the deliberate movements of a man preparing to say something his daughter wouldn't want to hear. "When your mother died," he began, and Adela felt her shoulders tense immediately. Miguel almost never talked about her mother. "I thought I could work through it, keep busy, stay focused on the business. You were only 8 and you needed stability, so I told myself the best thing I could do was maintain routine. This isn't the same thing, isn't it? You're using work to avoid feeling something you don't want to feel. I did that for 2 years. You want to know what it got me? Adela didn't answer, but Miguel continued anyway. It got me a successful business and a daughter who learned that emotions are problems to be managed instead of things that make you human. His voice was gentle, but the words hit hard. I should have taught you better. I should have shown you that it's okay to want things that don't fit neatly into a ledger. I'm fine, Adela said, but her voice came out tight. You're miserable, and you're making yourself more miserable by pretending you're not. What do you want me to do? Ride out to some ridge and throw away everything I've built here because some man I barely know says nice things about the way I think? I want you to stop punishing yourself for being human. The words hung in the air between them. Adela looked down at her hands, at the calluses from years of working with horses and leather and hard physical labor. Strong hands, capable hands, hands that knew how to hold things together. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I know. What if it doesn't work? What if I try and it falls apart, and I've wasted time and energy, and what if it does work? Miguel interrupted. What if you find something worth having? Are you willing to miss that because you're too afraid to try? Adela looked up at her father. He was watching her with an expression she'd seen before, but never really understood, a mixture of love and sadness and something that looked like regret. I just want you to have more than I did, he said. I want you to have the courage I didn't have, to choose something because it makes you happy, not just because it makes sense. Before Adela could respond, one of the ranch hands called from outside. Miguel, we got a situation with the fence line. Her father stood, touched her shoulder briefly, and left. Adela sat alone in the office, surrounded by ledgers and lists and all the concrete, manageable things she'd built her life around. And for the first time, they all felt insufficient. That night, she dreamed about the ridge. In the dream, she was standing there looking out over the valley, and Kyle was beside her, not saying anything, just present. The wind moved through the grass, and the sky was that particular shade of blue that only existed right before sunset, and everything felt both terrifying and exactly right. She woke before dawn with the dream still vivid in her mind and a decision crystallizing in her chest. Not today. She wasn't ready today. But soon. Maybe soon. 2 days later, Kyle came back. Adela was working with a young mare in the training corral when she saw him riding in. Her heart did that stupid jumping thing it had started doing whenever she saw him, and she hated it and cherished it in equal measure. This time he brought someone with him, a younger man, maybe early 20s, with similar features and the same quiet way of moving. Miss Cruz, Cale said as he dismounted, this is my brother Nathan. He's learning the business side of the operation. Nathan nodded respectfully. Ma'am, Cale's told me a lot about your stock. Says you've got the best eye for horses he's encountered in Texas. Your brother is generous with his assessments, Adela said, keeping her voice professional despite the way her pulse was racing. He's usually pretty stingy with compliments, actually, Nathan replied with a slight grin, which is why, when he gives one, we know he means it. Cale shot his brother a look that was equal parts exasperation and affection. We're here about possibly adding to our breeding program. Nathan wanted to see your operation firsthand. They spent the next hour walking through the stock. Adela explained bloodlines and training methods, while Nathan asked surprisingly intelligent questions. Kyle mostly stayed quiet, but she could feel him watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her hyper-aware of every word she spoke, every gesture she made. You really know your stuff, Nathan said eventually. No wonder Kyle keeps finding excuses to ride out this way. Nathan! Kale's voice carried a warning. What? It's true. You've made this trip 3 times in 2 months. We both know it's not just about the horses. Adela felt heat creep up her neck. She focused very intently on the mare beside her, running her hand along the horse's neck with more attention than necessary. I think we've seen enough for today, Kyle said firmly. Nathan, why don't you go settle things with Miguel while I finalize some details with Miss Cruz? Nathan's grin widened. Sure thing. Nice meeting you, ma'am. I'm guessing we'll be seeing a lot more of each other. He walked away whistling, and Adela was left alone with Kyle in the corral. The mare shifted beside her, and Adela kept her hand on the horse's neck, grateful for something to do. "I apologize for my brother," Kyle said. "He's young and hasn't learned when to keep his mouth shut. He's observant." "That too." Silence settled between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either, just weighted with all the things neither of them was saying. "Have you thought more about what we discussed?" Kyle asked finally. "Yes." "And?" Adela took a breath. This was it. The moment where she either stayed safe or took a risk. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "I need to understand something first," she said, still not looking at him. "What do you want from this?" "From me?" "Honestly?" "Always." Kyle moved closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she could see him in her peripheral vision. "I want to know you better. I want conversations that don't have to end because I have a 3-day ride ahead of me. I want to figure out if what I think is happening between us is real or if I'm imagining it." He paused. "And I want you to stop looking at me like I'm a problem you're trying to solve." "Well," despite everything, Adela felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I look at everything like it's a problem to solve. It's how my brain works." "I know. I find it charming. That's a very strange thing to find charming. You're a very strange woman to be charmed by. And yet here we are." Adela finally turned to face him fully. He looked tired, she realized. The ride from his ranch to hers wasn't easy, and he'd made it multiple times in recent weeks. For her. The thought made something in her chest ache. "That ridge," she said quietly, 5 miles west. "How often do you actually check it?" "Every time I'm in the area." "That's a lot of detours for something that might never happen." "Some things are worth the detour." The mare shifted again, bumping against Adela's shoulder. She steadied the horse automatically, her hands knowing what to do even while her mind spun. "I can't promise anything," she said. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm capable of being what you're looking for. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for honest." "Then, honestly, you terrify me." Kale's expression softened. "Good. You terrify me too." "That's supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you feel less alone in it." And somehow, it did. They stood there in the corral with the late afternoon sun slanting through the fence rails and the mare breathing softly beside them, and Adela felt something shift. Not a decision, exactly. More like a possibility opening up where before there had only been walls. "I'm not riding out to that ridge today," she said. "I know. But maybe sometime. When I'm ready. I'll be there." "You don't know that. You can't just keep checking it indefinitely." "Want to bet?" Despite herself, Adela laughed. It came out rusty, like she was out of practice, but it was genuine. "You're persistent. Only about things that matter." Nathan's voice called from the trading post, something about needing Kyle's opinion on a contract detail. Kale grimaced. "I should go help him before he agrees to something ridiculous." He hesitated, then added, "We're heading back tomorrow morning, early. If you wanted to, I don't know, ride out that direction, see us off." "I have work in the morning." "Right. Of course." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Adela?" "Yes?" "That smile. The one you're trying not to show right now. It's worth the 3-day ride." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the corral with a foolish grin spreading across her face, despite her best efforts to contain it. That night, Adela sat at her small desk in her room and did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She wrote down her feelings, not in careful ledger script, but in messy, honest sentences that spilled across the page without calculation or planning. She wrote about being scared, about wanting something she couldn't quantify, about the way Kyle looked at her like she was more than just competent, more than just smart, more than just the sum of her useful skills. She wrote about her mother, though she barely remembered her, about growing up watching her father work through grief by working harder, and how she'd learned to equate productivity with worth. She wrote about the ridge she'd never visited, and the man who kept checking it anyway. When she finally set down her pen, her hand was cramping, and the candle had burned down to a stub. But something in her chest felt lighter, like she'd set down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. She didn't ride out the next morning to see them off, but she thought about it, and that felt like progress. Kyle came back 2 weeks later. This time, Adela was expecting him, or maybe she was just hoping. Either way, when she saw him on the horizon, she didn't pretend it was just business anymore. "You're becoming a regular," she said as he dismounted. "Is that a problem?" "Logistically? No, your money's good and you haven't caused any trouble." "And non-logistically?" Adela met his eyes. "I'm still working that out." They walked through the operation again, ostensibly looking at new stock, but the conversation wandered into other territory. Kyle told her about life on the frontier, the challenges of building something stable in unstable territory, the complicated relationships between different groups, the constant balancing act of survival and growth. Adela found herself talking about things she rarely discussed: her mother's death, her father's grief, the pressure of being a woman in a business that expected her to be twice as good for half the respect. "You ever resent it?" Kyle asked. "Having to prove yourself constantly?" "Every single day. But resentment doesn't change reality, so I just work harder." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." They were standing by the fence line overlooking the eastern pasture. The afternoon was warm but not unbearable, and the horses grazed peacefully in the distance. "You know what's strange?" Adela said. "I've spent my whole life trying to be taken seriously, trying to prove I'm more than just Miguel's daughter, more than just a woman who got lucky in a man's business, and you just take me seriously, without me having to earn it first. Because you're worth taking seriously. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're smart and you work hard and you don't make excuses. I know you care about doing things right, not just doing them profitably. I know you see the world in patterns most people miss." He turned to look at her directly. "And I know you're trying to convince yourself that none of this matters because you're scared of what happens if you admit it does." Adela's breath caught. He was right. Of course he was right. "What if I'm not brave enough?" she asked quietly. "For what?" "For this. For whatever this is becoming." Kyle was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's doing something despite the fear, and you're one of the bravest people I've met." "I don't feel brave." "No one ever does." A horse whinnied in the distance. The sun moved lower in the sky, and Adela stood there wrestling with the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She wanted this, whatever it was, however complicated it might become. She wanted the conversations and the understanding and the way he looked at her like she was someone worth crossing counties to see. But wanting it and being ready for it were two different things. "I need more time," she said eventually. "I know." "You keep saying that, like you're not frustrated." "I am frustrated, but I also understand. Some things can't be rushed." "How long are you willing to wait?" Cale smiled, but there was something sad in it. "I don't know. I guess we'll both find out." He left an hour later, and Adela watched him go with a tightness in her chest that was becoming familiar. She was starting to recognize it for what it was: longing. Simple, honest, terrifying longing. That night, her father found her sitting on the porch long after dark. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Just thinking." "About anything in particular?" Adela was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you ever regret not remarrying after Mama died?" Miguel looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Sometimes. I think about what it might have been like to have a partner again, someone to share the work and the worry with." "Why didn't you?" "Fear, mostly. Fear of getting it wrong. Fear of bringing someone into your life who might not understand you or might try to change how I was raising you." He paused. "And by the time I got over the fear, I'd built such a routine around being alone that it seemed easier to just keep going." "Do you think that was a mistake?" "I think it was a choice. And like all choices, it had consequences." He looked at her in the darkness. "Why are you asking?" "Because I'm trying to figure out if I'm being smart or just scared." "About Kyle?" It wasn't a question. Adela nodded anyway. "Can I tell you something?" Miguel asked. "Something I've never told you before?" "Of course."
Your mother and I almost didn't get married. Her family thought I was too risky a prospect. Young, trying to start a business in rough territory, no guarantees. My family thought she was too refined for frontier life, that she'd make me soft. We had every logical reason not to do it. What changed? We decided that the risk of losing each other was worse than the risk of it not working out.
We decided that some things are worth trying even when the odds look bad. He reached over and took her hand. She died too young. We had less time than we deserved, but I've never regretted trying, not once. Adela felt tears prick her eyes. She squeezed her father's hand. I don't know if I'm strong enough, she whispered. You're stronger than you think. And besides, you don't have to be strong all the time. That's what having someone else is for. They hold you up when you can't hold yourself. They sat together in the darkness, and Adela let herself imagine what it might be like to have someone who understood, to stop carrying everything alone. It was terrifying, but it was also, in a strange way, hopeful. The next morning, Adela woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't keep living in this suspended state, caught between wanting and fearing. She threw herself into work, but this time it felt different. Not like escape, but like preparation. She was getting her affairs in order, making sure everything was running smoothly, creating space in her life for something new. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Kyle didn't come back, and Adela told herself she wasn't disappointed. He'd said he'd give her time. This was time. But late at night, lying in bed, she wondered if she'd waited too long, if the moment had passed, if he'd finally decided that a woman who needed this much time to make a decision wasn't worth the effort. The thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. Then, on a Tuesday morning when the heat was just starting to build and the sky was that washed-out blue of early summer, one of the ranch hands came running. Miss Cruz, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important. Adela's heart leapt. She forced herself to walk calmly to the trading post, smoothing her hair, checking that her shirt was tucked properly. But it wasn't Kyle standing in the yard. It was Nathan, and his horse was lathered with sweat like he'd been riding hard. Miss Cruz, he said, slightly out of breath. I need to talk to you. It's about Kyle. Fear shot through her. What happened? Is he hurt? No, well, not physically, but there's a situation. We had a land dispute with one of the neighboring operations. Things got heated. There might be legal trouble, maybe worse. Kyle's handling it, but Nathan hesitated. He's not handling it well. He's pulled back from everything. Won't talk to anyone, just works until he drops and then stares at the horizon like he's waiting for something that's never coming. Adela felt something crack open in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you're what he's waiting for, and I think you know that. Nathan, I'm not trying to pressure you. I just thought you should know. He told me not to come here, actually. Said you needed space, and I should respect that. But I watched my brother turn into someone I barely recognize over the past month, and I thought maybe you deserved to know the effect you're having. The words hit Adela like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own fear, her own uncertainty, that she hadn't fully considered what her hesitation might be costing Kyle. How bad is the situation? She asked. Bad enough that we might lose part of the ranch if it goes the wrong way. But honestly, I think Kyle cares more about losing you than losing the land. He hasn't lost me. Hasn't he? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're so busy protecting yourself from the risk that you've forgotten there's someone on the other side of that risk who's hurting too. It was harsh, but it was also true. Adela looked at this young man who'd ridden hard to deliver a message his brother hadn't asked him to deliver, and she saw the loyalty there, the love, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he could fix whatever was breaking his brother apart. Where is he? She asked quietly. At the ranch, dealing with surveyors and lawyers and all the bureaucratic nonsense that comes with someone trying to steal your land. Nathan paused. But I know for a fact that every few days he rides out to this ridge about 5 miles from here, sits there for an hour, then rides back. Still? Still. Even when he's drowning in problems, even when he has 100 other things he should be doing, he still checks that ridge, just in case. Adela closed her eyes. When had she become the kind of person who let fear dictate her choices?
When had she decided that safety was more important than possibility? "Thank you for coming," she said to Nathan. "I know it wasn't easy."
Are you going to do something about it? I don't know yet, but I'm going to stop pretending I don't care. Nathan nodded, satisfied. He started to mount his horse, then turned back. For what it's worth, Kyl's never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. Not once in all the years I've known him. Whatever you decide, at least you'll know you mattered. He rode off, leaving Adela standing in the yard with her heart pounding and her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. She found her father in the barn. I need to go somewhere, she said without preamble. Miguel looked up from the harness he was mending. He studied her face for a long moment, and then he smiled. About time. I might be making a huge mistake. Probably, but at least you'll be making a choice instead of letting fear make it for you. Adela hugged him quickly, fiercely. Then she went to saddle her horse. She didn't ride toward Kyl's ranch. That would take days, and she wasn't sure she'd make it the whole way without losing her nerve. Instead, she rode west. 5 miles through territory she knew, and then into land that was less familiar. The sun was high and hot, and her horse's hooves kicked up dust that hung in the still air. She almost missed the ridge. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight rise with a good view of the valley below. But when she crested it and looked out at the landscape stretching endlessly toward the horizon, she understood why Kyl had chosen this spot. It felt like standing at the edge of something, like possibility made geography. She dismounted and walked to the highest point, looking out at the world with new eyes, and she let herself imagine it, really imagine it. Not the fear or the risk or all the ways it could go wrong, just the possibility of what it might be if it went right. The sun moved across the sky, her horse grazed peacefully nearby, and Adela sat on that ridge, waiting. She didn't know if Kyl would come today, or tomorrow, or ever again. But she was here. Finally, terrifyingly, here. And that felt like the bravest thing she'd ever done. Hours passed. The sun shifted overhead, crawling across the sky with the indifference of something that had witnessed a million human dramas and found them all equally inconsequential. Adela's horse dozed in the shade of a scrub oak, and she sat on a flat rock watching the valley below, her heart alternating between hope and the creeping certainty that she'd made a fool of herself. Maybe Kyl had stopped coming. Maybe Nathan's visit had been his brother's misguided attempt to help, and Kyl himself had already moved on. Maybe she'd waited too long, and this gesture, finally showing up to the place she'd been too afraid to visit, was nothing more than a performance for an empty audience. The thought made her stomach twist. She was about to give up, about to mount her horse and ride back to the safety of everything she knew, when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Coming from the west. Adela stood, her pulse suddenly hammering in her throat. She wiped her palms on her pants and tried to arrange her face into something that didn't look desperate or terrified, or like she'd been sitting here for 3 hours working up the courage to do something she should have done months ago. The rider came into view, and even from a distance she recognized the way he sat his horse. Kyl, moving with that same quiet confidence, his attention on the horizon until he crested the ridge and saw her standing there. He pulled up short. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other across 20 yards of scrubby grass and hot Texas air, and Adela felt the weight of every conversation they'd had, every time she'd walked away, every moment she'd chosen fear over possibility. Kyl dismounted slowly. He didn't rush toward her, didn't close the distance with any urgency. He just walked his horse forward at an easy pace, his eyes never leaving her face, and Adela realized he was giving her time. Even now, even after everything, he was making sure she had space to change her mind. "Hi," she said when he was close enough to hear her. It came out scratchy, and she cleared her throat. "Hi." His voice was careful, neutral, like he was afraid of assuming anything. "I should have come sooner." "You're here now." "I am." Adela took a breath. "Nathan came to see me, told me about the land dispute, about how you've been." Something flickered in Kyl's expression, irritation, maybe, or embarrassment. "Nathan needs to learn when to mind his own business." "I'm glad he didn't." Kyl was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I told him not to involve you. You made it clear you needed space, and I was trying to respect that." "I know, But I've been using needing space as an excuse to avoid making a decision, and that's not fair. Not to you, and not to me either. So you're here to make a decision? I'm here because I finally stopped being so afraid of making the wrong choice that I forgot I was also choosing not to have something I want. The words came out in a rush, not polished or calculated, just honest. I'm here because I've been sitting on that ridge for 3 hours trying to figure out what to say, and I still don't have the right words, but I know that not saying anything is worse than saying something imperfect. Cale's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something softer than the careful neutrality he'd been wearing. 3 hours? Don't make fun of me. I'm not. I'm just... He stopped, shook his head slightly. I've been checking this ridge for months. I told myself I'd give you time, that I wouldn't pressure you, that I'd just keep showing up, and eventually either you'd come or I'd accept that you weren't going to. But 3 hours, that's pathetic? Brave. Adela felt heat creep up her neck. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. Of what? Everything. This not working. This working and then falling apart later, disappointing you, not being what you think I am, making a choice based on feelings instead of facts, and having it blow up in my face. Cale took a step closer, not crowding her, just closing some of the distance between them. Can I tell you something? Please? I'm terrified too. I have been since the first time I met you, and you corrected my math on that feed order without apologizing for being right. His mouth quirked slightly. You looked at me like you expected me to be angry about it, and when I wasn't, you looked almost disappointed, like you'd been preparing for a fight and didn't know what to do when you didn't get one. I remember. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about you, about the way your mind works, the way you see patterns, the way you don't make excuses or soften yourself to make other people comfortable. And I thought, this woman is going to ruin me for anyone else. Adela's breath caught. Kyle, let me finish, please. He waited until she nodded. I've been dealing with this land dispute for weeks. Surveyors claiming our boundaries are wrong, lawyers throwing around terms I barely understand, neighbors who've decided they want what we've built. And you know what the worst part is? It's not losing the land. It's that every time I have to make a decision about it, I find myself wishing I could talk to you first, because you'd see the angles I'm missing. You'd ask the questions I haven't thought of. You'd help me figure out the smart play. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're the first person in years who's made me want something more than just survival. I know when I'm dealing with impossible situations, I imagine what you'd say about them. I know I've ridden this direction so many times my horse probably knows the route better than I do. He paused. And I know that if you're not ready for this, I'll accept that. But I need you to understand that I'm not offering you something casual or temporary. I'm offering you everything I have, and I need to know if that's something you could want. The honesty of it hit Adela like a physical force. No games, no careful maneuvering, just a man standing in front of her offering her truth and asking for the same in return. I want it, she said quietly. That's what scares me so much. I want it, and I don't know how to want things without calculating the cost first. So calculate it, right now. What's the cost? Adela thought about it, really thought about it, the way she would analyze any business proposition. If this doesn't work, I'll have wasted time and emotional energy. I'll have made myself vulnerable to someone who might hurt me. I'll have to explain to my father and the people I work with why I made a choice that didn't pan out. I'll have to deal with feeling foolish and wrong, okay? And if it does work? If it does work, she trailed off, trying to imagine it. If it does work, I might have someone who understands me, someone I can talk to about things that matter, someone who sees me as more than just competent or useful. Someone who makes me want to take risks I'd normally never consider. Which scenario scares you more? The question cut through all her carefully constructed defenses. Because the truth was, the idea of it working, of having something real and meaningful and vulnerable, terrified her more than the idea of it failing ever could. The second one, she admitted, because if it works, I won't be able to go back to how things were before. I'll be changed. And I've built my whole life on being consistent and controlled and unchangeable. Kyle nodded slowly. I understand that. But Adela, you're already changed. You've been different since the day we met, whether you want to admit it or not. The question isn't whether you'll change. It's whether you'll let yourself grow towards something or just stay stuck fighting against it. He was right. She'd felt it for months, that sense of something shifting inside her, of her old certainties not fitting quite right anymore. She'd blamed it on stress, on work, on anything except the obvious truth that Kyle had walked into her life and made it impossible to pretend she was satisfied with just survival. I don't know how to do this, she said. I don't know how to be in a relationship. I don't know how to balance what I want with what makes sense. I don't know how to trust that this won't fall apart the moment things get difficult. Neither do I. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too vivid to be real. Adela looked out at the valley, at the endless stretch of land that had shaped her entire life, and she realized something. She'd spent so long trying to control every variable, to minimize every risk, to make herself invulnerable. But standing here with Kyle, terrified and uncertain and more honest than she'd been in years, she felt more alive than she had in all those careful, calculated years before. Okay, she said. Kale blinked. Okay? Okay, I'm willing to try. I'm willing to figure this out. I'm willing to be scared and do it anyway. She turned to face him fully. But I need you to understand something. I'm going to be bad at this. I'm going to overthink things and pull back when I get frightened and probably try to solve emotional problems with logic. I'm going to frustrate you. Probably. And you still want to try? Yes. Why? Kael stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back. Because I've never met anyone who challenges me the way you do. Because you're brilliant and stubborn, and you don't take shortcuts or make excuses. Because when you smile, really smile, not that polite thing you do for customers, it's like watching the sun come out. He paused. And because I think you're worth the risk, all of it. Adela felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back angrily. She didn't cry. She'd trained herself out of crying years ago because tears were weakness, and weakness was vulnerability, and vulnerability was, "It's okay," Kael said softly. "You don't have to hold it together all the time." And that's what broke her. Not the fear or the uncertainty or the massive leap she was about to take, but the simple permission to not be strong for once, to let someone else see the parts of her she'd spent years hiding. The tears came, and she didn't try to stop them. Kael didn't move to hold her or comfort her, and she was grateful for that. He just stood there, present and patient, giving her space to feel without trying to fix it. When the tears finally stopped, Adela wiped her face with her sleeve and laughed shakily. "This is a terrible way to start, whatever this is." "I disagree. I think it's honest, and I'll take honest over perfect any day." "Even when honest is messy?" "Especially then." Adela took a breath, steadying herself. "So what happens now?" "Now we figure out how to make this work, the logistics of it, how often we can see each other, how we navigate the distance and the different worlds we live in, how we deal with the fact that people are going to have opinions about this." "People are definitely going to have opinions. Does that bother you?" "Yes, but not enough to stop." Adela was surprised to realize it was true. A month ago, the thought of people gossiping about her personal life would have sent her into defensive lockdown. Now, standing on this ridge with Kael, she found she cared less about what other people thought than she cared about what she might miss if she let their opinions dictate her choices. "We should probably talk about expectations," Kael said. "What you want from this, what I want. Make sure we're starting from the same place." It was such a practical suggestion, so perfectly suited to both their natures, that Adela smiled despite everything. "You want to negotiate terms?" "I want to make sure we understand each other." "Okay, you first. What do you want?" Kael thought for a moment. "I want to see you regularly, not just when business brings me this direction, but intentionally. I want conversations that go deeper than surface level. I want to know what you think about things, what you worry about, what makes you happy. I want to build something with you that's based on actually knowing each other, not just the idea of each other." "That's reasonable. What about you?" Adela considered.
I want honesty. Always. Even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. I want you to tell me when I'm being difficult, or when I'm overthinking something, or when I need to step back and breathe. I want someone who won't let me hide behind logic when what I really need is to admit how I feel. I can do that. And I want time. Not indefinite time like before, but enough time to do this right. To not rush into something just because it feels good in the moment. How much time? I don't know. Months, probably. Time to see how this works in reality, not just in theory. Cale nodded. I can work with that. Anything else? Yes. Adela met his eyes. I want you to promise me something. If this starts to go wrong, if we realize we're not compatible, or if the distance is too much, or if we're making each other miserable, I want you to tell me. Don't stay out of obligation or because you think you should make it work. I'd rather have an honest ending than a dishonest continuation. Same goes for you. Deal. They stood looking at each other, and Adela felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty. She didn't think she'd ever have complete certainty about this, but something like acceptance. She was doing this, really doing it, taking a risk on something that couldn't be calculated or predicted or controlled. I should probably tell you about the land dispute, Kael said, since we're being honest about everything. Nathan mentioned it was serious. It is. There's a claim that our original survey was off by about 300 acres. The neighboring operation is arguing that a portion of what we've been using is actually their land. We've got lawyers involved now, but it's expensive and time-consuming, and there's a real possibility we could lose. What does your gut tell you? That the claim is garbage. We've got documentation going back 15 years showing our boundaries. But documentation doesn't always matter when the other side has more money and better connections. Adela thought about it, her mind automatically shifting into problem-solving mode. Who did your original survey? A man named Patterson. Good reputation, careful work. He's been dead about 7 years now. And the current survey? Who's doing that? Company called Western Land Services. They're supposedly neutral, but I have my doubts. What kind of doubts? The kind where their findings suspiciously align with whatever the highest bidder wants them to say. Adela nodded slowly. So you need documentation that proves Patterson's survey was accurate. Do you have the original maps? Yes, but they're challenging the methodology, claiming the equipment used back then wasn't precise enough to be reliable. That's convenient for them. What about physical markers, stone cairns, blazed trees, anything that would have been used to mark the boundaries at the time? Some, but 15 years of weather and growth have obscured a lot of it. Not all of it, though. And if you can find even a few that match Patterson's survey exactly, that undermines their argument about precision. Adela was fully engaged now, turning the problem over in her mind. You need someone who understands surveying but isn't connected to either party. Someone who can examine the original work and testify to its accuracy. Those people are expensive, and the ones who aren't expensive are usually not trustworthy. What about academic institutions? Universities with surveying programs? They might have professors who'd be willing to consult, and their testimony would carry weight because they don't have a financial stake in the outcome. Cale stared at her. I hadn't thought of that. It's just logic. You need credible evidence from a neutral source. Academia provides both. You're brilliant. I'm practical. You're both. Cale's expression had shifted from worried to something like hopeful. This might actually work. If we can get someone credible to examine Patterson's methodology and confirm it was sound, combined with the physical markers and our documentation, it creates a strong case. Not guaranteed, but strong. Adela paused. How soon do you need to present your defense? We have about 6 weeks before the hearing. That's tight, but workable. You'll need to move fast on finding an expert witness. I will. Thank you. Seriously. I've been staring at this problem for weeks and couldn't see past the immediate obstacles. That's what happens when you're too close to something. You need outside perspective. Kael smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. So does this count as our first collaboration? I suppose it does. I like it. Don't get used to it. I'm not planning to solve all your problems for you. I wouldn't want you to.
But it's nice to know I can talk to you about them. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the sun continue its descent. Adela's horse nickered softly, and Kael's answered. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of sage and dust. I should get back, Adela said eventually. My father will worry if I'm out too late. I'll ride with you part of the way. They mounted their horses and started east, riding side by side at an easy pace. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from the land dispute to other topics. Kael's brother Nathan and his tendency to speak before thinking. Adela's latest batch of horses and the one that kept trying to jump the fence. The strange weather patterns this season and what they might mean for the fall harvest. It was ordinary talk, the kind of conversation people have when they're comfortable with each other, and Adela realized with a small jolt of surprise that she was comfortable, more comfortable than she'd been in months of anxious avoidance. When they reached the point where their paths would diverge, Kael pulled up his horse. When can I see you again? He asked. I don't know. When can you make the trip? I can be back in a week, but that's probably too soon. Why? Because you said you wanted time. I don't want to rush you. Adela considered. A week ago, the idea of seeing Kael again in 7 days would have sent her into a spiral of anxiety and overthinking. Now the thought just made her feel glad. A week is fine, she said. Come for dinner. I'll talk to my father, make sure he's prepared for the idea that this is happening. You think he'll have objections? I think he'll have questions, but he's wanted me to take a risk on something personal for years, so he'll probably just be relieved I finally am. Kael's expression softened. I'm glad you're taking the risk. Ask me again in a few months. I might have regrets. You won't. You sound very certain. I am. Not because this will be easy, but because I think you're capable of anything you decide to do. And you've decided to do this. It was such simple faith, such uncomplicated belief in her, that Adela felt her chest tighten again. She wasn't used to people believing in her without qualification, without waiting to see proof first. A week, she said again, partly to confirm it and partly to give herself something concrete to hold on to. Come around midday. That'll give us time to talk before dinner. I'll be there. They sat for another moment, neither quite ready to separate, and then Kael leaned over in his saddle and did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand just for a second, his fingers warm and rough with calluses that matched her own. Thank you, he said quietly, for coming to the ridge, for taking the chance. Thank you for checking it all those times, for not giving up. He squeezed her hand once and then let go, turning his horse west. Adela watched him ride away, and this time the ache in her chest felt different. Not loss or longing, but anticipation. The promise of something beginning instead of ending. She rode home as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that would fade to purple and then black. By the time she reached the cruise operation, stars were starting to appear, and the lanterns were lit in the barn. Her father was waiting on the porch. He took one look at her face and smiled. You went to the ridge. I went to the ridge. And I'm scared and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm probably going to mess this up in at least a dozen ways. Adela dismounted and tied her horse. But I'm doing it anyway. Miguel came down the steps and pulled her into a hug. I'm proud of you, mija. I haven't done anything yet except show up. Showing up is everything. They went inside and Adela told him about the conversation on the ridge, about the decision she'd made, about Kael coming for dinner in a week. Miguel listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. This is going to be complicated, he said finally. The distance, the different worlds you come from, the logistics of building something when you can't see each other regularly, it won't be easy. I know. But I think you can handle it. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Or I'm delusional and about to make a massive mistake. Maybe both. Miguel's smile was kind. But at least you're making a choice. That's more than a lot of people ever do. That night, lying in bed, Adela let herself think about what came next. The dinner in a week. The conversations they'd need to have about how to make this work. The inevitable challenges and conflicts and moments of doubt. But she also let herself think about the other moments. The conversations that stretched into evening. The feeling of being understood. The possibility of building something with someone who saw her not as a problem to solve or a resource to utilize, but as a person worth knowing. It was terrifying. But it was also, in a way she was just beginning to understand, worth being terrified for. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams of ridges and horizons and hands reaching across distance to meet in the middle. The week that followed felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Adela caught herself checking the eastern road more than she wanted to admit, counting down the days with a mixture of anticipation and dread that made her feel like a stranger to herself. She'd never been someone who waited for things. She made things happen, controlled outcomes, stayed 3 steps ahead of every situation. But this, waiting for Kyle to arrive, wondering what it would be like to see him again now that everything had changed, this was different. This required a kind of patience she hadn't needed to develop. On the 3rd day, while she was working through inventory numbers that refused to add up properly, her father appeared in the office doorway. "You've checked that column 4 times, he said. "The numbers are off." "The numbers are fine. You're distracted." Adela set down her pencil with more force than necessary. "I'm working." "You're hiding." Miguel came in and sat down across from her. "You do this when you're nervous. You bury yourself in work that doesn't actually need doing because it gives you the illusion of control." "I'm not nervous." "Mija, you've reorganized the feed storage twice, cleaned tack that was already clean, and personally inspected every horse in the operation, including the ones we're selling next week and won't be our problem anymore." He smiled gently. "You're terrified." Adela wanted to argue, but the truth was too obvious to deny. She slumped back in her chair. "What if I can't do this?" she asked quietly. "Do what?" "Any of it. What if I'm too damaged or too closed off or too used to being alone? What if I try and I'm just bad at it?" Miguel was quiet for a moment, studying her with the same careful attention he gave to horses he was evaluating. "Do you remember when you were 12 and I started teaching you to break horses?" "What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question." "Yes, I remember." "And do you remember the first time you tried to work with that gray gelding, the one that had been mistreated before we got him?" Adela felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. "He threw me into the fence, twice." "3 times, actually, but who's counting?" Miguel's expression was kind. "You wanted to give up. Said the horse was too broken, too afraid, that you weren't skilled enough to reach him. And you made me try again. I didn't make you do anything. I told you that broken things can heal if someone's patient enough to let them. And I asked if you thought you were capable of patience." "I was 12. I said no." "You said no, and then you went back out there every day for 3 months until that horse trusted you enough to let you work with him." Miguel leaned forward. "You're not 12 anymore. You've spent years learning patience with horses. Maybe it's time to apply that same patience to yourself. Horses are different." "Are they? They're scared. They've been hurt. They don't know if they can trust you. They test you to see if you'll give up or hurt them or prove them right about all their fears." He paused. "Sounds pretty similar to me." Adela felt tears prick her eyes again. She was crying more in the past week than she had in the past decade, and she wasn't sure how she felt about it. "I don't want to mess this up," she whispered. "Then don't expect perfection, from yourself or from him. Just show up and be honest and give it time." Miguel reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. "And remember that making mistakes isn't the same as being a failure. It's just part of learning." The day Kyle was supposed to arrive, Adela woke before dawn with her stomach in knots. She dressed carefully, not in her work clothes, but in the nicer outfit she kept for dealing with important clients, then changed her mind and put on regular clothes because she didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, then changed again because looking like she didn't care seemed worse than looking like she tried. She finally settled on something in between and spent an embarrassing amount of time on her hair before giving up and pulling it back the way she always did. "You look fine," her father said when she came downstairs for the 3rd time. "I look nervous." "You look like someone who cares about making a good impression. There's nothing wrong with that." He's seen me covered in horse sweat and dust. "I don't know why I'm worried about impressions now." "Because context matters. This isn't business anymore. This is personal." Adela poured herself coffee she didn't actually want and tried not to watch the road. Kael arrived just before midday, right when he'd said he would. Adela saw him coming from the barn and had to force herself not to run out to meet him. She walked at a normal pace, wiping her palms on her pants, and met him in the yard. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He dismounted, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Kael smiled, and some of the tension in Adela's chest eased. "You made it," she said, which was a stupid thing to say because obviously he'd made it. He was standing right there. "I did. No trouble on the road." He glanced toward the barn. "Your father around?" "He's in the office, giving us space, I think." "Smart man." "He has his moments." Adela gestured toward the corral. "Want to walk? I'm too nervous to stand still." They walked the perimeter of the operation, talking about nothing important: the weather, the horses, the state of the roads between their properties. Safe topics that didn't require vulnerability or honesty. Just normal conversation between two people who were trying to figure out how to be around each other now that everything had changed. After about 20 minutes, Kael stopped and turned to face her. "Adela, we're doing that thing where we pretend everything's normal and avoid talking about what actually matters." "I know." "So should we stop pretending?" "Probably." She took a breath. "I'm nervous. I don't know how to act around you now. When it was business, I knew the rules. This doesn't have rules, and that makes me want to run away and hide until I can figure out a strategy." "You want to strategize a relationship?" "I want to strategize everything. It's how my brain works." Kael's expression softened. "Okay, then let's strategize. What are you most worried about?" "Honestly, that I'm going to be terrible at this. That I'm going to shut down every time things get emotional or difficult. That you're going to realize I'm not worth the effort." "And what are you hoping for?" The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so much time thinking about what could go wrong that she hadn't let herself really think about what going right would look like. "I'm hoping that this feeling I have when I'm around you, like I can breathe deeper or think more clearly or just be more myself. I'm hoping that doesn't go away," she said quietly. "I'm hoping we can figure out how to make this work despite all the practical obstacles. And I'm hoping that in 6 months or a year, I'll look back on how scared I was today and laugh about it." Kael nodded slowly. "Those are good hopes. Want to know mine?" "Please." "I'm hoping that you'll let me see the parts of yourself you usually hide. I'm hoping we can build something that makes both our lives better instead of just more complicated. And I'm hoping that someday you'll stop waiting for me to leave or hurt you or prove that your fears were right all along." The words hit hard because they were true. Adela realized that despite agreeing to try this, part of her was still braced for disappointment, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I don't know how to stop doing that," she admitted. "We'll figure it out, together." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Can I hold your hand?" It was such a simple request, but it made Adela's heart race. She nodded, and Kael reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, she felt something settle in her chest. They stood there for a moment, just holding hands like awkward teenagers, and then Adela laughed. "What's funny?" Kael asked. "This. Us. I'm 26 years old and I feel like I've never held someone's hand before." "Have you?" "Not like this. Not when it mattered." "Oh, then we're learning together." They walked back toward the main house, still holding hands, and Adela was surprised by how much easier it was to talk now. Like the physical connection had opened some pathway that made words flow more naturally. Miguel was waiting on the porch, and when he saw them approaching hand in hand, his smile was warm and knowing. "Kael, good to see you again." "You too, sir. Thank you for having me." "Thank my daughter. She's the one who extended the invitation." Miguel gestured toward the house. "Lunch will be ready in about an hour. In the meantime, I thought you two might want to talk. Privately. I'll be in the barn if you need me." He left with the practiced discretion of a man who understood when to make himself scarce, and Adela led Kael inside to the small sitting room that they almost never used. "Your father's being very accommodating," Kael observed. "He's wanted me to have a personal life for years. I think he's just relieved I'm finally attempting one." They sat on the old sofa that creaked under their weight, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Kael said, "I've been thinking about logistics." "Of course you have. So have I."
The distance is the biggest challenge. 3 days travel each way means I can't make this trip frequently. Maybe once a month at most, and even that might be pushing it depending on how the ranch work goes. Once a month isn't enough to build anything real, Adela said, feeling her anxiety spike. I know, which is why I had another thought. What if you came to me sometimes? Not all the time, but enough that we're sharing the burden of the distance instead of putting it all on me. Adela's first instinct was to say no. Leave the operation, leave her father to handle everything alone. It was impractical, irresponsible, impossible. But then she thought about what she'd said on the ridge, about being willing to try, about not letting fear make her decisions. I've never left the operation for more than a day or two, she said slowly. I don't know if I can. Why not? Because my father needs me. The business needs me. I have responsibilities. Your father managed before you were old enough to work. I imagine he could manage for a few days at a time now. Cale's tone was gentle but firm. Unless the real issue is that you don't trust him to handle things without you. That's not it. Then what is it? Adela struggled to articulate it. It's that if I leave, I'm admitting that I'm not indispensable, that the operation can function without me. And if it can function without me, then what's my value? What's my purpose? Your value isn't just what you do, it's who you are. Easy for you to say. You don't understand what it's like to have to prove yourself constantly. Don't I? Cale's voice had an edge now. I'm trying to build a sustainable operation on frontier land that most people think is too harsh to work. I've got neighbors who think I'm too soft, others who think I'm too aggressive, and everyone watching to see if I'll fail. I understand proving yourself just fine. Adela felt chastised. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, just think about it. About whether staying here constantly is actually necessary or if it's just comfortable. He paused. And think about what you're asking me to do. You want me to make this 3-day journey every month, but you won't consider doing the same? That's not balanced, Adela. He was right. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving still felt wrong, like she'd be abandoning her post. I'll think about it, she said finally. I'm not saying yes, but I'll consider it. That's all I'm asking. They talked through other logistics. How often they'd see each other, how they'd communicate in between visits, what they'd tell people about their relationship. It was practical, methodical, the kind of planning that made Adela feel more in control. But underneath the logistics, there was something else brewing. A question Adela was afraid to ask, but couldn't ignore anymore. What do you actually want from this? She asked during a lull in the conversation. Kyle looked confused. What do you mean? I thought we covered that. No, I mean long term. Are we talking about companionship? Partnership? Something that might lead to marriage eventually? She forced herself to meet his eyes. Because I need to know what I'm working toward. I can't do open-ended. Marriage. Kyle said the word carefully, testing it. Or whatever you want to call it. A permanent commitment. A life together. I need to know if that's even a possibility or if we're just seeing how things go with no real destination in mind. And if I said I don't know yet, that I need to see how this goes before I can make that kind of promise? Adela felt her chest tighten. Then I'd say that's fair but also terrifying, because I'm not good at ambiguity. I know, but I can't promise you something I'm not sure about yet. That wouldn't be honest. Kale shifted to face her more fully. What I can tell you is that I'm not doing this casually. I'm not interested in something temporary or half-committed. I'm here because I think we could build something permanent, but I need time to know for sure, and I need you to be willing to give me that time without demanding guarantees I can't give yet. It was honest. It was also exactly what Adela didn't want to hear. She wanted certainty, clear outcomes, a defined path from point A to point B. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted. Can't or won't? I don't know. Both may be. She stood up, needing to move. I need to know what I'm working toward. I need goals and milestones and some kind of assurance that this isn't just going to drift indefinitely until one of us gets tired or frustrated or realizes it's not working. So, set milestones. Tell me what you need to see to feel secure. Adela paced the small room. I need to see that we can handle conflict, that when things get difficult, we don't just avoid each other or shut down. I need to see that the distance doesn't erode what we're building. I need to know that you're willing to let me see the parts of your life you usually keep private and that you want to see mine. Those are reasonable benchmarks. What's the timeline? 6 months. If we can make it 6 months dealing with each other honestly, navigating the distance, handling whatever conflicts come up without falling apart, then we talk about next steps.
If we can't make it 6 months, then we acknowledge it's not working and end it before we waste more time. Cale was quiet for a long moment. You're really approaching this like a business contract. It's how I make sense of things. I know, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just noticing. He stood and came to stand in front of her. Okay, 6 months. We work on being honest, handling conflict, managing distance, and at the end of 6 months, we evaluate and decide on next steps together. You agree to that? I do. On one condition. What condition? That you actually try. Not just go through the motions waiting to fail so you can say you were right to be scared. Actually try to make this work. The words stung because they were accurate. Part of Adela was already preparing for failure, already building her defenses for when this inevitably fell apart. I'll try, she said quietly. Really try. Then we have a deal. They shook hands, which felt absurd and perfect, and very much like them. A relationship negotiated like a business contract, with terms and timelines and clear expectations. Lunch was less awkward than Adela had feared. Miguel kept the conversation moving, asking Kael about the land dispute and seeming genuinely interested in the strategy they'd discussed. Kael, for his part, treated Miguel with easy respect, neither deferential nor overly familiar. After lunch, Miguel excused himself to handle some paperwork, and Adela showed Kael around the operation properly, not as a business tour, but as a glimpse into her life. The barn where she'd spent countless hours as a child, the corral where she'd learned to break horses, the small office where she did all her calculations. This is where you spend most of your time, Kael observed, looking at the cramped space with its overflowing desk and stacks of ledgers. It's not glamorous. It's you. That makes it interesting. But they ended up by the eastern pasture, watching the horses graze as the afternoon stretched toward evening. I should head back soon, Kael said eventually. I want to make it part way before dark. You could stay. We have space. I could. But I think leaving today is better. This was a lot, emotionally. We both probably need time to process. He was right, though Adela hated admitting it. She was already feeling overwhelmed, already retreating into her head to analyze every word they'd exchanged. When will I see you again? She asked. 3 weeks. I need to deal with some things at the ranch, meet with the lawyer about the land dispute. But 3 weeks I'll come back, and maybe, he hesitated, maybe the month after that you could come to me, see where I live, meet Nathan properly, see if you can stand being in my world for a few days. I said I'd think about it. I know, I'm just planting the seed. They walked back to where his horse was waiting. Kael checked the saddle, then turned to face her. Thank you for today, for letting me in, even though it scared you. Thank you for being patient with me. I'm not always going to be patient, just so you know. Sometimes I'm going to push back or call you on your avoidance, or get frustrated with how much you overthink things. Good, I need that. Kael stepped closer, and Adela's breath caught. He reached up slowly, giving her time to move away, and tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear. I want to kiss you, he said quietly. But I'm not going to. Not yet. Why not? Because I want you to be ready for it. I want you to want it without being scared of it. And I don't think we're there yet. Part of Adela was relieved. Part of her was disappointed. All of her was aware of how close he was, how easy it would be to close the distance, how much she wanted to, and how terrified she was of wanting it. Okay, she whispered. Okay. He stepped back, and the moment passed. 3 weeks, Adela. I'll be here. She watched him ride away until he disappeared over the rise, and this time the ache in her chest was different. Not loss or longing, but something more complex, hope mixed with fear, anticipation laced with doubt. Her father appeared beside her. How did it go? We have a 6-month plan, clear milestones, defined expectations. Miguel laughed. Of course you do. You've turned a relationship into a project. Is that bad? No, mija. It's very you. And if it helps you feel secure enough to actually try, then it's exactly right. That night, Adela lay in bed thinking about everything they'd discussed. The 6-month timeline. The possibility of visiting his ranch. The kiss he'd wanted but chosen to wait for. She thought about what her father had said about broken things healing if someone was patient enough. About how she'd spent 3 months earning the trust of a damaged horse because she'd believed he was worth the effort. Maybe it was time to believe the same thing about herself. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Adela threw herself into the operation with renewed focus, but this time it felt different. Not like hiding, but like preparation. She was getting things organized, making sure everything would run smoothly if she ever did decide to leave for a few days. She wrote Kyle a letter, something she'd never done before, words on paper instead of face-to-face conversation. She told him about a difficult horse she was working with, about a customer who'd tried to cheat her, and how she'd handled it, about her father teaching her a new technique for reading account ledgers. Ordinary things. Life things. The kind of details people shared when they were letting someone in. His reply came 10 days later, delivered by a ranch hand making the trip for other reasons. Kyle's handwriting was neat, but not flowery. His words direct, but warm. He told her about progress on the land dispute, about Nathan accidentally flooding the barn, about a mare that had foaled twins against all odds. He also told her he missed her, which was simple and honest and made Adela's chest ache. She wrote back immediately. When Kyle arrived 3 weeks later, Adela met him in the yard with less nervousness and more genuine gladness. They fell into conversation easily, like picking up a thread they'd only set down temporarily. "I've been thinking about your invitation," she said as they walked, "about visiting your ranch. And I'm going to do it. Not this month, but next month. I'll come for 4 days, see your operation, meet your brother properly, see if I can actually leave here without falling apart." Kale's smile was worth every ounce of fear the decision had cost her. "You won't fall apart, but even if you do, I'll be there to help you back together." That's a bold promise. It's an honest one. They spent the day together, working alongside each other in easy companionship, and when Kyle left that evening, he kissed her forehead gently, not the kiss they were both thinking about, but a promise of it. Adela stood in the yard long after he'd disappeared, her hand pressed to where his lips had touched her skin, and let herself smile. 6 months. They had 6 months to figure this out. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Adela thought they might actually make it. The month leading up to Adela's visit to Kyle's ranch passed in a strange rhythm of preparation and second-guessing. She'd committed to going, had told her father and arranged for him to handle things in her absence, but every day brought a fresh wave of doubt about whether she was making a colossal mistake. "You're doing it again," Miguel said one afternoon when he found her reorganizing the supply room for the second time that week. "Doing what?" "Creating work to avoid thinking about what's actually bothering you." Adela set down the box she was holding. "I'm leaving you alone for 4 days. That's a lot to handle." "I've been handling things alone since before you were born. I think I'll manage." Miguel leaned against the doorframe. "What are you really afraid of? That I'll get there and realize I don't fit into his world? That I'll be uncomfortable and awkward, and he'll see that I'm not capable of adapting? That this whole thing is based on conversations and a few visits, and the reality of spending extended time together will prove we're incompatible? Or what? Or you'll get there and realize you fit better than you expected. You'll be comfortable and natural, and he'll see parts of you that make him more certain, not less. And then you'll have to deal with the fact that this might actually work." Miguel's expression was gentle. "Sometimes the thing we fear most isn't failure. It's success and what we'll have to change to accommodate it." The words hit harder than Adela wanted to admit, because he was right. Part of her was still hoping for a clean, definable reason to walk away. Something concrete that would let her return to the controlled, solitary life she understood. "I don't know how to be someone's partner," she said quietly. "Nobody does until they try." "You think I knew how to be your mother's husband when we got married? I was 23 years old and barely knew how to take care of myself, let alone build a life with someone else. We figured it out as we went. And if we can't figure it out, then you'll have tried. and trying is the only way you'll know for sure. He pushed off the doorframe. Stop looking for reasons to fail, mija. Start looking for reasons to succeed. 2 days before she was supposed to leave, Kael sent word through a traveling merchant that he was dealing with complications on the land dispute and might not be at the ranch when she arrived. He'd left instructions with Nathan to make her welcome, but he couldn't guarantee he'd be there the whole time. Adela's first instinct was relief. She could postpone the trip, wait for a better time, avoid the whole situation. Her second instinct was anger, not at Kael. He couldn't control when legal issues demanded his attention, but at herself, at how quickly she'd jumped to using his absence as an excuse to back out. She packed anyway. The journey west took 3 days of hard riding through territory that grew progressively rougher and less settled. Adela had never been this far from home, and every mile made her more aware of how far outside her comfortable boundaries she was traveling. She camped alone the first 2 nights, which should have been frightening but instead felt oddly peaceful. No one expecting anything from her, no calculations to make or problems to solve, just her horse, and the vast, indifferent sky. On the 3rd day, she passed into territory Kael had described in his letters, the harder country where settlements were sparse, and survival required different skills than she'd needed in the more established regions around her father's operation. She spotted Kael's ranch from a distance in the late afternoon. It was smaller than she'd expected, but clearly well-maintained with corrals and outbuildings arranged with practical efficiency. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and she could see horses moving in the pastures. Nathan came out to meet her before she'd even dismounted, his grin wide and welcoming. "Miss Cruz, you made it. How was the ride?" "Long, but uneventful." Adela swung down from her horse, her legs stiff from 3 days in the saddle. "Is Kael here?" Nathan's expression shifted to something apologetic. He had to ride to the county seat yesterday. The land dispute hearing got moved up unexpectedly. He left at dawn, said he'd be back as soon as he could, but it might be a few days. The disappointment was sharp and immediate. Adela had spent 3 days riding toward this reunion, and now she was standing in his yard without him. "I can head back," she said. "Come another time when—" "No," Nathan interrupted. "Absolutely not. Kael would kill me if I let you leave. He wants you here. He's just stuck dealing with legal nonsense." He grabbed her horse's reins. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private." The room Nathan led her to was small but comfortable, a guest space in one of the outbuildings, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the western pastures. Someone had left fresh water in a pitcher and clean linens on the bed. "Kael got everything ready before he left," Nathan said. "Made me promise 3 times I'd make sure you were comfortable. He was pretty torn up about having to leave." "It's not his fault. Legal matters don't wait." "No, they don't. But that doesn't make it less frustrating." Nathan paused in the doorway. "Dinner's in about an hour. Nothing special, just what we usually eat. Hope you're okay with simple food. I grew up on a ranch. I'm not expecting anything elaborate." Alone, Adela unpacked her few belongings and tried to process the strange mix of emotions churning in her chest. Disappointment that Kael wasn't here. Relief that she'd have time to adjust to this new place without the immediate pressure of his presence. Uncertainty about what she was supposed to do with herself for the next few days. She changed out of her travel clothes and went to wash up, then walked outside to explore. The ranch was quiet in the evening light, the kind of working quiet that came from a well-run operation. Everything had its place. Tools were stored properly, fence lines were maintained, the horses looked healthy and well cared for. It reminded her of home, and that realization made something in her chest ease slightly. Dinner was indeed simple, stew and bread eaten in the ranch kitchen with Nathan and 2 ranch hands who worked the operation. The men were polite but clearly uncertain how to interact with her, and the conversation was stilted until Nathan started telling a story about one of the horses escaping and leading them on a 2-hour chase through the hills. "Kael was furious," Nathan said, laughing. "Not at the horse, at me for leaving the gate unlatched. Made me ride out every morning for a week at dawn to check all the latches personally." "Sounds like something he'd do," Adela said. "He's thorough." That's a polite way of saying he's obsessive about details. Nathan's tone was affectionate. "But it's why this place runs as well as it does. He thinks through every angle, plans for every contingency." "He does that with everything?"
Pretty much. Drives me crazy sometimes, but I can't argue with results. Nathan studied her curiously. He's different with you, though. Less calculated. More just himself. What do you mean? I mean, usually he's got this wall up. Friendly enough, but distant.
Like he's always evaluating, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But when he talks about you or when he came back from visiting you, that wall's not there. He's just Kyle, not the rancher or the businessman or the guy who's got everything figured out. Just himself. The insight made Adela's throat tight. I'm not sure I deserve that kind of trust. Maybe not. But he's giving it to you anyway. Nathan stood to clear his plate. For what it's worth, I've never seen him care about someone the way he cares about you. So whatever doubts you're carrying, just know that from his side, this is real. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in the unfamiliar room, Adela stared at the ceiling and thought about trust. About how Kyle had given her his without demanding she earn it first. About how terrifying that was and how badly she wanted to be worthy of it. The next morning, Nathan put her to work. Not as a guest, but as someone who knew her way around horses and ranching. They spent the day checking fence lines, working with young horses, and dealing with the 100 small tasks that kept an operation running. Adela fell into the rhythm of it easily, her body knowing these movements even if the landscape was different. And in the work, she found a strange kind of peace. This wasn't so foreign after all. Different details, same fundamental principles. You're good at this, Nathan observed as they took a break around midday. I've been doing it my whole life. No, I mean, you're good at adapting. Cale said you were worried you wouldn't fit here, but you're fitting fine. Better than fine, actually. It's only been a day. Sometimes a day is enough to know. Nathan took a drink from his canteen. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough. What made you finally decide to come here? Kyle said you've been hesitant about the whole thing from the start. Adela thought about how to answer. I realized I was more afraid of never knowing than I was of it not working out. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. I think that's probably the only good reason to take any big risk. Nathan was quiet for a moment. My brother's a good man, but he's not easy. He expects a lot, from himself and from people he cares about, just so you know what you're getting into. I expect a lot too. Maybe that's why we work. Maybe, Nathan smiled. Or maybe you're both just stubborn enough to make it work through sheer force of will. The second day passed similarly. More work, more conversation with Nathan, more gradual adjustment to this place that was starting to feel less foreign and more like somewhere she could actually see herself belonging. On the third morning, Adela woke to the sound of hoofbeats. She looked out the window and saw Kyle riding in, his horse moving fast like he'd pushed hard to get here. Her heart did that stupid jumping thing again, and she didn't even try to suppress it anymore. By the time she'd dressed and gotten outside, Kyle had already dismounted and was talking to Nathan. He looked tired, like he'd been riding through the night, but when he saw her, his whole face changed. Adela. Hi. They stood looking at each other across the yard, and Nathan cleared his throat loudly. I'm going to go check on something very important somewhere else. He disappeared into the barn, leaving them alone. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you arrived, Kyle said. The hearing got moved up and I couldn't. It's okay. Nathan took good care of me. I wanted to be here. I wanted to show you around myself, introduce you to everything properly. We have time now. Kyle nodded, but he still looked unsettled, like he wasn't sure what to do now that she was actually here. How was the hearing? Adela asked. Good, actually. Your suggestion about the academic expert witness worked. We found a professor from a surveying program who examined Patterson's original work and testified that it was sound. The judge seemed impressed. We won't know the final decision for a few weeks, but I think we have a real chance. I'm glad. It wouldn't have happened without you, without that conversation we had about finding neutral, credible sources. I was so buried in the problem, I couldn't see the obvious solution. That's what happens when you're too close to something. You need outside perspective. They fell into a slightly awkward silence, and Adela realized they were both nervous. After all the letters and visits and conversations, now that she was actually here in his world, neither of them quite knew how to be. Want to show me the operation? She asked. Properly this time? Relief flashed across Kael's face. Yes, I should clean up first. I rode through the night, and I probably smell like horse and sweat. I've smelled worse. Even so. He hesitated, then added, I'm really glad you're here. So am I think. His smile was quick and genuine. Honest, good. While Kael cleaned up, Adela waited in the yard, watching the ranch wake up fully. Ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, horses moved in the corrals. Smoke from the kitchen fire carried the smell of breakfast cooking. It was different from her father's operation, but not unfamiliar. The same underlying current of purposeful activity, the same sense of people working toward common goals. When Kael returned, they walked the property together. He showed her everything. The breeding program he was building, the irrigation system he'd designed to make the harsh land more productive, the plans he had for expansion if the land dispute went in their favor. He talked about the challenges of frontier ranching with the same directness he brought to everything else. The isolation, the difficulty of getting supplies, the delicate balance required to work with neighboring operations that didn't always share his approach. It's harder than what you're used to, he said as they stood looking out over the western pastures. More uncertain, resources are scarcer, margins are thinner, every decision has bigger consequences. But you love it. I do. I love building something from nothing. I love the problem solving, the constant adaptation. I love that out here you can't coast on reputation or connections. You either do the work and do it well, or you fail. Adela understood that. She'd always been drawn to the same thing, the satisfaction of concrete results, measurable progress, success that came from skill rather than circumstance. Nathan said, "You're different with me," she said, "that you drop some wall you usually keep up." Kael was quiet for a moment. He's not wrong. I spend most of my time being careful, calculated, making sure I'm presenting the right version of myself to different audiences. With you, he trailed off. With me what? With you, I don't want to be calculated. I just want to be honest, even when it's messy or uncertain or makes me vulnerable. That's terrifying. It is. But it's also the only way this works. If we're just performing for each other, if we're always trying to be the version we think the other person wants, we'll never actually know each other. They walked back toward the main house, and Adela found herself noticing small details. The way Kael automatically checked fence posts as they passed. The same habit she had. The way he spoke to the horses with quiet respect. The way his shoulders relaxed slightly when they were alone together, like he could finally set down some weight he usually carried. That evening, they had dinner with Nathan and the ranch hands, and Adela watched Kael interact with his people. He was firm but fair, expected high standards but acknowledged good work. He listened when the hands raised concerns and incorporated their input into decisions. It reminded her of how her father ran his operation, and of how she'd been learning to run it alongside him. After dinner, Kael walked her back to the guest quarters. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossibly vivid against the harsh landscape. "Tomorrow I want to show you the river canyon," Kael said. "It's about an hour's ride from here. The place that made me decide to build here instead of somewhere easier. I'd like that." They stood outside her door, and the silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just weighted with things neither quite knew how to say. "Thank you for coming," Kael said finally. "I know it wasn't easy for you to leave your father's operation, to come somewhere unfamiliar, to take that kind of risk. Thank you for giving me a reason to try." Kael reached out and took her hand, the gesture becoming familiar now. "I missed you, more than I expected to." "I missed you too, which is inconvenient because missing people isn't productive." He laughed. "Very inconvenient. Terrible for efficiency." "Exactly." They stood there holding hands like awkward teenagers again, and then Kael did something that surprised her. He pulled her into a hug, not tentative or careful, but solid and real, his arms around her like he'd been wanting to do this since the moment he saw her. Adela stiffened for just a second before letting herself relax into it. He smelled like leather and sage and something uniquely him, and she realized with a small shock that she felt safe. Actually, genuinely safe in a way she almost never felt. "Good night, Adela," he said softly. "Good night." He released her and walked away. And Adela went inside feeling like something fundamental had shifted. Not in the situation, but in her, in how willing she was to be here, to try this, to stop fighting against what she wanted. The next morning dawned clear and hot. Kael was waiting with 2 horses already saddled when Adela emerged, and they rode west toward the river canyon he'd mentioned. The landscape grew progressively more dramatic as they rode. Rocky outcroppings, steep hills, vegetation that looked half dead, but somehow survived in this harsh environment. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way that Adela found herself drawn to. The canyon itself was stunning. The river had carved through solid rock over centuries, creating walls that rose 50 feet on either side. Water pooled in places, creating small oases where trees grew and birds nested. "This is why I chose this location," Kael said as they stood on the canyon rim. "Everyone said I was crazy, said the land was too harsh, water was too unreliable, I'd never make it work. But when I saw this place, I knew. If water could carve through solid rock over time, patient and persistent, then I could build something here too. It's beautiful. It's honest. Nothing pretending to be something it's not. Just rock and water and time doing what they do." He turned to look at her. "That's what I want us to be. Honest. Not trying to be something we're not, or hiding the hard parts." Adela met his eyes. "I'm scared I'm going to disappoint you. That the reality of being with me day to day will be harder than you expect. I'm scared of the same thing. That I'll let you down or fail to be what you need." Kael paused. "But I'd rather fail trying than succeed at avoiding the attempt." They climbed down into the canyon and sat by one of the pools, their feet dangling in the surprisingly cool water. For a while they didn't talk, just existed together in the quiet. Then Kael said, "I need to tell you something about why I'm so careful normally, why I keep that wall up that Nathan mentioned. You don't have to. I want to. I want you to know." He took a breath. "Before I came here, I was in business with someone I thought I could trust, a partner. We were building something good, or I thought we were. Turns out he was skimming money, making deals behind my back, setting me up to take the fall when things went bad. What happened? I figured it out before it completely destroyed me, but barely. Lost most of what I'd built, had to start over from almost nothing. That's how I ended up here. It was the only place I could afford to try again." He looked at her. "And I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable again. Never trust someone that completely. Never let my guard down. Until me. Until you. And it terrifies me. Because I don't know if I'm being smart or stupid. If I'm learning from past mistakes or just repeating them with different variables." Adela understood that kind of fear intimately. The fear that opening yourself up was just inviting pain. "I've been thinking about something my father said," she told him, "about broken things healing if someone's patient enough. I spent 3 months earning the trust of a horse that had been mistreated. Never gave up on him, even when he threw me or bit me or seemed like he'd never come around. And eventually, he did. He learned to trust me because I proved myself trustworthy through consistency, not words. What's your point?" "My point is that maybe we're both a little broken, a little afraid, a little convinced that trusting someone will just end in pain. But maybe if we're patient with each other, if we keep showing up even when it's hard, we can heal the parts that are damaged." Kael reached over and took her hand. "That's a lot of maybes." "It is, but I'm starting to think maybes are better than certainties that keep you alone." They sat by the water for another hour, talking about fears and hopes and the complicated reality of trying to build something when you've both been hurt before. It wasn't comfortable conversation. It was messy and sometimes painful and required them both to admit things they'd rather keep hidden. But it was honest. And honesty, Adela was learning, mattered more than comfort. That night, back at the ranch, Kael asked if she wanted to see his workshop, the place where he designed equipment modifications and worked through technical problems. It was a small building filled with drawings and half-finished projects and the organized chaos of someone who thought by making. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said. "When problems feel too big or complicated, I work with my hands and let my mind sort through things." Adela understood that too. She did the same thing with horses and numbers. They spent the evening there, Kael showing her various projects, while Adela asked questions that made him think differently about problems he'd been stuck on. The conversation flowed easily, moving from technical challenges to broader questions about how they each approached problem solving. "You see patterns I miss," Kael observed at one point. "You look at something and immediately identify the underlying structure. You see possibilities I miss. You look at something broken and imagine how to fix it better than it was before. We balance each other. We might, if we can figure out how to actually be together instead of just visiting occasionally." It was the question they'd been dancing around for months. The logistics were daunting, the distance, their separate operations, the practical reality of building a life together when they lived days apart. "I've been thinking about that," Kael said carefully. "About what comes after the 6 months, assuming we both want there to be an after." "I'm listening." "What if we started planning for merging our operations? Not immediately, but as a goal. Combine resources, knowledge, build something together that's stronger than what we have separately." Adela's first instinct was to reject the idea outright. Merge her father's established operation with Kael's frontier ranch? The logistics were impossible, the risks enormous. But then she thought about it more carefully, about what they each brought to a partnership. Her experience and connections, his innovation and determination, her father's established reputation, Kael's fresh perspective. "That's a massive undertaking," she said slowly. "I know, which is why I'm proposing it as a long-term goal, not an immediate plan. Something to work toward if we decide we want a future together. My father would need to be involved in any decision like that." "Of course. I wouldn't expect otherwise." Kael paused. "I'm not trying to pressure you. I just want you to know I'm thinking long-term, that I'm not interested in something temporary or half-committed. Neither am I. But I need to know you understand what you'd be taking on. I'm difficult. I overthink everything. I have control issues and trust issues, and I'll probably drive you crazy on a regular basis. And I'm stubborn, and I push too hard sometimes, and I have my own trust issues that make me pull back when I should lean in. We're both imperfect. That's not a reason to quit before we start." Adela looked at this man who'd somehow become essential to her life in the span of a few months, and she made a decision. Not a calculated one, not one based on logic or risk assessment, just a choice based on what she wanted. "I love you," she said. The words came out abrupt and graceless, but they were true. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And that terrifies me because I don't know how to love someone without losing myself. Kael's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to track. "You love me." "Yes, unfortunately. It's very inconvenient." "Adela." "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know, because we said we'd be honest, and that's the truth." Kael crossed the space between them in 2 steps and kissed her. Not tentative or careful, but certain and thorough, like he'd been waiting months for permission and finally had it. Adela kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back, the want and the fear and the hope, all tangled together into something overwhelming and perfect and terrifying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I have for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up." Arrogant. "Honest." Adela laughed, and it came out shaky but genuine. "What do we do now?" "Now we figure out how to make this work. Not the perfect version, just the real one. We make mistakes and fix them. We have hard conversations and come out the other side. We build something together that's worth the risk." "That sounds difficult." "Probably, but difficulty isn't the same as impossible." They stayed in the workshop until late, talking through possibilities and logistics and dreams. It wasn't neat or organized or perfectly planned. It was messy and uncertain and full of maybes. But for the first time, Adela found she was okay with that. Maybe maybes were enough. The next morning, Adela woke with the sun and walked out to find Kael already working in the corrals. She watched him for a moment before he noticed her, the economical way he moved, the patience he showed with a young horse that was testing his boundaries, the quiet competence that had drawn her to him from the start. He looked up and smiled, and something in Adela's chest settled into place. She'd spent her whole life calculating risks, avoiding vulnerability, building walls to protect herself from pain. And here she was, standing in the middle of harsh frontier country, in love with a man who lived days away from everything she knew, contemplating a future she couldn't fully predict or control. It should have terrified her. And it did. But it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. "Want to help?" Kyle called. "Always." She climbed into the corral, and they worked side by side in easy silence. Two people who'd each walked away from fear 3 times before finally walking toward each other instead. It wasn't perfect, it wouldn't always be easy, but it was real, and honest, and worth every risk they'd taken to get here. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting yourself from life and start living it instead. Adela had learned that the hard way, through months of resistance and fear, and the slow, painful process of letting someone in. But standing there in the Texas morning with dust on her clothes and Kyle's quiet presence beside her, she understood something she'd never quite grasped before. Love wasn't about certainty or perfect outcomes or minimizing risk. It was about choosing someone despite the uncertainty, about believing that whatever came, you'd face it together, about trusting that the connection you built was strong enough to weather the inevitable storms. She'd walked away 3 times because she was afraid. The 4th time, she'd walked toward instead of away, and that had made all the difference. Later that day, as she prepared to ride back home, Kyle stood with her in the yard holding her horse's reins. 2 weeks, he said. "I'll come to you in 2 weeks, and then we start figuring out the real logistics. How to make this permanent." Permanent is a scary word. It is. Want to be scared together? Adela smiled. "Yes, I think I do." He kissed her goodbye, still new enough to feel thrilling, familiar enough to feel like coming home, and she rode east with her heart full and her mind already working through the practical challenges ahead. There would be difficult conversations with her father about the future of the operation, logistics to solve about combining 2 ranches separated by days of travel, conflicts to navigate and compromises to make, and 1,000 small adjustments as they learned to build a life together. But Adela had stopped looking for reasons why it wouldn't work. Instead, she was looking for reasons why it would. And she was finding them everywhere, in shared values and complementary skills, in honest communication and genuine respect, in the simple fact that they made each other better. 6 months had been the timeline they'd set for evaluation. They were barely halfway through, but Adela already knew what her decision would be. Some risks were worth taking. Some maybes were worth betting on. Some people were worth the terrifying leap of faith it took to love them. Kyle was all 3. And Adela Cruz, who'd built her life on calculation and control, found that the most important decision she'd ever made was the one that couldn't be calculated at all. It could only be felt and chosen and lived into with courage and hope and the willingness to be changed by it. The frontier stretched out before her as she rode, vast and harsh and beautiful. And for the first time in her life, Adela wasn't afraid of what she couldn't control. She was just grateful for what she'd found when she finally stopped running from it,